Good morning. My name is Eldon Baber. I'm the Executive Director with the Raise Foundation. I'd like to start off this morning by thanking you for joining us and just letting you know that we hope this will be just a great time for you this morning. We've got some fantastic panelists that will be joining us. I'd like to start off with giving you just a quick background on the Raise Foundation and who we are, what we do. The Raise Foundation was formed in 1974. We were actually formed to serve as the Child Abuse Prevention Coordinating Council for Orange County. This was actually done by the Board of Supervisors through a formal resolution. And the resolution was actually done in response to the state's mandate for every county to have a coordinating council. The California Welfare Institution Code defines a child abuse prevention council as a community council whose primary purpose is to coordinate community efforts to prevent and respond to child abuse. This month, obviously, is Child Abuse Awareness Month nationally, often referred to as Blue Ribbon Month. I'd just like to share with you a couple of thoughts from a personal perspective. From one day to the next, I am personally challenged with looking at the information that deals with child abuse, neglect, and maltreatment here in Orange County, as well as the state and across our country. In 2020, just this last year, over 24,500 reports of abuse were received in Orange County. Now, that number looks like a big number, and it's sometimes better for me to break it down into something a little more digestible. That means that every day in Orange County last year, there were 67 reports for abuse, neglect, or maltreatment. Of those reports, 4,450 were substantiated. Basically, for those of you that don't understand what that linguistics is about, it's a fancy way of saying that they were documented and they were indicated to be true, actual reports of confirmed abuse. So what does that mean? That means every day in Orange County, there are 12 children with a substantiated case of child abuse. That's one child every 2 hours. Sadly, last year there were 8 fatalities. For me personally, this is part of what drives me. This is part of what keeps me engaged in this movement, in this effort, in our cause. I can think of no other condition that affects children, whether it's cancer, lung disease, heart disease, that has that volume of impact. The reality is, when you look at child abuse, neglect, maltreatment, it's a the long-term implications. And some of our panelists are going to be talking about this today from the standpoint of trauma, long-term impacts of trauma, adverse childhood experiences. Just this past March, Safe and Sound issued a report, The Economics of Child Abuse, a study of California and its counties. And in that report, there are some very interesting thoughts. For example, the long-term cost of this abuse to children in our county, not in the state, in our county, is over, to put that into context, that money would buy almost 2,500 homes in Orange County. It would provide for childcare for over 150,000 children each year. So for me, I put this into the context of this is a pretty serious issue, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. That's part of why we're involved in April as a awareness month function. To honor or to recognize Child Abuse Prevention Month here in Orange County, we promote the thematic of keep kids safe, healthy, and happy. This year, as you know, because you are here with us, we're hosting this Blue Ribbon Community Forum. And part of this is to demonstrate the impact of a multidisciplinary or an interagency representation that's part of the Child Abuse Prevention Council here in Orange County. Today, we're going to feature several of our council members or staff from their respective agencies discussing key initiatives and topics that relate to child welfare. Today's panelists include Jamie McDonald and Bianca Tomuto from the Academy of Pediatrics, Orange County chapter, Deputy District Attorney Kelsey Weeman from obviously Orange County's District Attorney's Office, and Detective Nasario Solis from the Tustin Police Department, along with Catherine Hamill, who represents the Junior League of Orange County. So I'd like to start us off with our first panelist, and we'll be doing this in a sequence. We'll have each panelist come in, do a brief presentation, and then we'll wrap up today with doing a kind of a group discussion, and we will be taking questions from those that are participating online with us. So to start off with, to discuss adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress, I'd like to introduce Jamie McDonald and Bianca Tomuto. Jamie has a master's in public health, is the executive director of the Academy of Pediatrics, Orange County chapter, a position she's held for almost 6 years. Jamie has worked with the AAP Orange County chapter for almost 20 years, developing and implementing and evaluating educational programs, materials on a variety of children's health issues, including injury and violence prevention, child development and developmental screening, early literacy, food insecurity, and child poverty. She has a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from UC Santa Barbara, go Gauchos, and her master's degree in public health from California State University, Long Beach. She lives in Long Beach with her husband, 2 sons who are 14 and 10, and their farm, as she describes it, their dog Zelda, their 4 hens, and 2 guinea pigs, and a saltwater aquarium full of sea creatures. Bianca is a project coordinator who works with Jamie at the Academy of Pediatrics in Orange County. She's been with their team since 2015 and has helped promote and market the organization's events and their membership. In addition, she has supported event planning, coordinated quality improvement projects, a food insecurity project, and now is working with their ACEs Aware peer-to-peer learning project. Jamie, Bianca, I'd like to turn the mic over to you, so to speak. Please take it away.
Thank you, Eldon. That was a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much. And we're really happy to be here. I'm going to start us off and then hand it over to Bianca to talk about our ACEs Aware project, our peer learning project with our physicians. But I first want to give a little bit of an overview of who AAP Orange County is. So Bianca, next slide, please. So the American Academy of Pediatrics is a national organization. It represents the United States and its territories as well as Canada. And AAP is broken up into districts with various chapters. And what makes us unique in California is in other chapters are full states. So we're unique in California and New York in that we have multiple chapters within our own state. And that gives us a little bit more of the ability to represent our local pediatricians and membership and community. You'll see here, we have 4 chapters in California. We have chapters 1, 2, 3, and we are considered chapter 4, and that we're this tiny orange speck, in Southern California. We represent 1 county. And what's great about that is that we're able to really localize the work that we do to our community. But we still have the same, basically the same voice at our national level. And all of our chapters, by the way, are separate independent entities, and we're a nonprofit organization working within the state of California. Next slide. So our mission at AAP Orange County is to ensure optimal health for all Orange County children through pediatric excellence. And we do this through a number of ways. So we are an association, we're a membership organization, but we are also much more than that because we really focus on the patients and families that our members serve. We have nearly 500 members serving the Orange County children. First and foremost are pediatricians and pediatric subspecialists. And we also have the resident pediatricians and medical students that are learning here in Orange County. We have one residency program, pediatric residency program at Chalk UCI's residency program. Next slide. We're also partners with many community organizations and agencies. We do a lot of collaborative work, and we're really proud of that. This is a very small sample of the many organizations that we work with, including the Raise Foundation, which we're thrilled to be a partner with. Next slide. So we accomplish most of our work through education for our membership, our pediatricians, through continuing medical education. We also have what we call community health advocacy programs. So our community health programming throughout Orange County on a variety of topics. And we also work collaboratively with the other chapters in our state at the state level on legislative advocacy, as well as through our national organization and federal advocacy. And these are legislation related to children's health and well-being. Next slide. We have a variety of committees that work on a number of different very important initiatives, including school health, mental health, our ACEs committee, which we'll talk about today. We have a new committee that is blossoming on environmental health and climate change. And then injury and violence prevention, which has been an important initiative since, in the last 20 years and plus since I've been here at Orange County AAP. Next slide. We have lots of task force teams. We have, and I should add that our members are all volunteers, and they go above and beyond to work on these task forces and committees on a number of these issues because of their care and dedication to the patients and families that they serve. Next slide. One highlight of this past year, since we've been through extremely challenging times, our AAP Orange County chapter's leadership has been looking at ways we can continue to provide community support without physically being with the community. And one of those ways we have done that this year is through a program called AAPOC for Families. This is a social media, digitally based educational program that is done all through volunteer work, developing materials and videos on a variety of educational topics that have been promoted through social media channels in English and Spanish, and are now living on our website at AAP Orange County. Next slide. We have been very present with discussions and planning on topics related to COVID-19, including returning to school and returning to sports, looking at current data and science-based messaging on school safety practices, making sure that that schools are a priority and that students can return as soon as possible safely, so that the mental and emotional toll of COVID-19 can be mitigated. Next slide. And we are also extremely proud of promoting the COVID-19 vaccine. And now that adults age 16 and older are eligible to get vaccines, we are continuing to promote. We have a I got the shot button that you can wear proudly to continue to promote the safety and effectiveness and importance of getting a COVID-19 vaccine. So if you have received your vaccine and would like one of our buttons, we still have many more of them, and we're happy to get them out because we really feel it's so important to continue to promote that the COVID vaccine is important and safe and effective, getting us through this pandemic. Next slide. And then finally, we have a wonderful resources webpage that is we started this, I think the second day of shutdown, we started putting COVID-19 resources up on our webpage. We're now revamping that, making it as accessible and informative and as timely as possible. And this is thanks in almost all thanks to Bianca for her enthusiasm and her technical abilities and design work. She has been working really hard to create this wonderful resources webpage. So please check it out when you get a chance. So our ACEs Aware initiative has started at the in June of last year. And next slide, please. And just a little bit of background on the ACEs Aware work that's being done in the state. So Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is a pediatrician based in Northern California, is also our California's first Surgeon General. And she and Dr. Karen Mark have developed the ACEs Aware program at the state level. Next slide. Part of this has been to ensure reimbursement for Medi-Cal providers in California who are providing ACEs screening to their patients. So if providers who see Medi-Cal patients are trained in ACEs through the ACEs Aware training, they are eligible for a $29 payment for screening patients from 0 to age 65 using a qualified screening tool. And the tools are free, and they just basically have to complete the certified training and self-attest to completing it. Next slide. And I think most of you are aware of what ACEs is, that, adverse experiences particularly in childhood, lead to toxic stress, and that toxic stress leads to emotional, physical tolls on our bodies, and leads to chronic illness during both in childhood and later in life. And by being able to train health providers, physicians on being informed on screening and addressing trauma within their care, providing that trauma-informed care, and providing them the tools that they need for that, then they can effectively mitigate or eliminate some of the issues that might occur due to that trauma. Next slide. I see what does ACEs mean, and I'll get to that in just a second. The ACEs Aware mission at California is to change and save lives by helping providers understand the importance of screening for adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs, and training providers to respond with trauma-informed care to mitigate the health impacts of toxic stress. Next slide. So adverse childhood experiences are stressful or traumatic experiences that people by age 18 have identified. And this was part of a landmark study by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, where they looked at 10 categories of diversities that children would, that may have been experienced in childhood, and associated that with the with different illnesses and issues later in life. And the 10 categories that are within the ACEs screening are broken down into 3 different areas: abuse, neglect, and then household dysfunction. And the screening is relatively simple. It looks at identifying just yes or no questions of experience of any of these 10 experiences. And a scale is rated 0 to 10, with a 4 or above being a high risk for adverse effects from trauma and toxic stress. Next slide. So one of the wonderful things that California is doing is not only promoting the screening of ACEs for everyone, but also providing a lot of training for anyone who wants to learn more about it. So anybody can go and take the free 2-hour online course. It does offer continuing medical education and maintenance of certification credits that may also be available for other CEUs. They might be applicable. It is free and it is informative. It is required for healthcare providers to take. But all of the information, next slide, please. All of the information that is there is also available to anybody who would like to see it and learn about it. By screening for ACEs, this allows our medical providers to understand the increased health risks that a patient may be more at risk for due to toxic stress, develop more resource and referral pathways for our patients and families, and to help empower patients to identify, some of the reasons why some adverse health experiences are occurring. Next slide. So there are, as I said, plenty of resources. There's a provider toolkit, and this is all available at the acesaware.org website. There is a toolkit for providers. Next slide. and resources. This is a clearinghouse of resources for all ACEs. And it is, it's constantly being updated and provided. And then finally, next slide, the COVID-19 is being viewed, of course, as a traumatic experience for all of us, and has been shown, especially with individuals who already have experience and maybe have a higher ACEs score, that COVID-19, of course, the stress related to that is going to enhance those adverse experiences. So there are many resources on managing the stress related to COVID-19 in particular, as well as other forms of toxic stress. And I will put all of the links into the chat as I give it away now to Bianca to talk about what we are doing.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for the opportunity to share this quality improvement project, which our chapter's been working on. It's been really exciting. We consider ourselves very blessed to be one of 100 organizations across California who've received funds for this grant, and we are focusing on one of 3 of the focus areas, which is provider engagement. So we're, considering AAP works with pediatricians, we are able to work with providers throughout our community to implement this project. And we are or providers have the opportunity to share lessons learned and practices, and that's specifically through peer-to-peer learning strategies. And we'll get into that a bit more, what that means and what that looks like. But our goal was to form a collaborative of providers to work together to develop best practices, to increase ACEs screening, to provide resources and referrals, and to guide patients in a trauma-informed approach of care to care. So this is our small but mighty team. Dr. Rashmi Basu is from Pediatric and Adult Medicine in Tustin, and she is leading us. And then you've all met Jamie. And then we also have a project leadership team, and they all have unique perspectives and have helped to create this project and really help it move forward. And we have a total of 15 practices from all over Orange County, and even one in Pomona. And we have small practices and large practices, and we even have developmental pediatricians. So it's been quite a journey learning from each other, seeing how the providers are implementing this ACEs screening, depending or considering their patient population. And as Jamie explained, ACEs Aware is geared towards Medi-Cal patients, but we realized we needed to be flexible and of course, open it up to providers that aren't necessarily screening for Medi-Cal, because this is going to be relevant to everyone down the line. And California is just focusing on Medi-Cal patients right now and Medi-Cal providers, but we are kind of jumping the gun and moving forward and already opening it up to other patients. And to identify their toxic stress. So I'm going to provide some insight into this project and take you through the project structure and what we've learned so far, and also where we're going. So this workflow is a great picture kind of showing our project, and we would get practices interested, have them sign up with us. And as Jamie mentioned, they would do that 2-hour provider training, which is something the California ACEs Aware Initiative is really trying to promote and wanting providers to complete. And then they start administering that screening tool, and which is asking questions about those 10 different categories that Jamie had shown that really neat picture of. And then providers are asked to report on how many screens they complete. They're asked to participate in monthly webinars, and also to share some of their work. And we'll get into that. The work that they're doing is completing PDSAs is what we call them, or Plan, Do, Study Acts. And that is a process where they're conducting small tests of change. And I'll get into that a little bit later as well. But we are, well into our project. We're going to wrap this up at the end of July. So we're excited to share a little bit of what we've been doing. And as I said, one thing that we ask of our providers is to actively participate. And this is kind of our timeline and what it looks like. And each month looks pretty much the same, where we have online webinars. They're completing these PDSAs and submitting their data. And data consists of how many screenings they're completing a month. So our timeline has been divided into 3 stages to allow providers time to focus on each step or each stage. And we're currently in stage 2, and I'll go into detail for each of these stages. And stage 1 is increasing screening. So practices are starting at different points. Some practices were already screening for ACEs, some were not screening at all. So they all really started at different spots. We developed the survey for them to get an idea very practically about where they're standing. For example, are all Medi-Cal patients being given a PEARLS screen to fill out? That really allowed the providers to sit down and analyze, okay, where are we starting from? Stage 2 is expanding screening. So if they were only screening Medi-Cal patients, maybe now they want to screen to other insurances. Some even started with, we're only screening after 2 p.m. or we're only screening from 1 to 11-year-olds. So it looked very different for each of the practices. And then we have thankfully partnered with Help Me Grow and the Orange County Children's Screening Registry, which is a really great resource. All providers which are using Cerner as their EHR have their data automatically uploaded or imported into the registry. And then stage 3 is developing a plan to follow up on high-risk patients through referrals and providing resources. So there's really great benefits, some for our chapters that we work with really great partners like CHOC, specifically the quality improvement advisors who are available to work one-on-one with some of our practice to go into their practice and see where are you, where are we starting, where can we move forward. Also Help Me Grow and their Orange County Children's Screening Registry. PACES is something that might be of interest to some of you, is an online social, kind of like a social media network for all things ACEs, where there are communities throughout the world, really internationally, that are working towards increasing ACEs screening and developing resilient families and children, and just looking out for the well-being of those who have been affected by trauma. And then the Orange County Department of Education, we also have a communications grant with them in which we were developing and sharing resources on resilience through social media and our websites and various avenues. We're also offering credit for this project, which is a great benefit to our providers. And let me move forward. So monthly data, as I mentioned, we do collect monthly data. We're asking providers simply to let us know how many screenings are you completing? How many people are you talking to about, whether they've experienced trauma or toxic stress? And it's really just starting small and slow so that they can identify those patients and see where they can go from there. We are thankful to receive a chart like this from the Orange County Children's Screening Registry, where we get data, and data helps us then track over the months how we're doing. And this is a collective line graph showing within the 15 practices how we're doing over time. And as you can see, we're really on an upward trend and really increasing screening within Orange County, which is great news to us. And I did want to show just a sample. This is CHOC and the practices from CHOC that are participating. They're also on an upward trend. They get to see this data themselves and see how many of each of the screens. We have a child caregiver screen, a teen caregiver screen, and a teen self screen, and how they're moving forward. And Chalk is a very large network, but I also want to show you this practice, which is just one provider within her location. She was so optimistic and dedicated, and she said, I want to participate. So she is also just trying her best to complete ACEs screenings each month. And we're grateful that she's dedicated to that. Okay, I'm going too fast. I'm sorry. How much time do I have left? I want to be mindful of that.
We're probably right at about time now for a couple questions.
Okay. I'm happy to take questions. Didn't get through them all, but maybe some of the questions we can answer some of those, what we didn't get through.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in real quick, by the way. I know that 20 minutes is nowhere nearly long enough to talk about these topics, all of the topics being presented today. So for those of you that are like, man, 20 minutes really wasn't enough, I'm totally cognizant of that. And we will hopefully be able to do more of these in the future where we can spend more time on individual topics or issues. So Bianca and Jamie, I know you guys had to cover so much in that span, and that was great. Eldon, I will turn it over to you for questions.
Oh, you're muted, Eldon.
We do have a couple questions already that have popped in. One was with regards to the screening. With regards to once the provider determines that there may be risk or that these ACEs screenings have resulted in some type of identification of something, what's the next step? What does the provider do with that information?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's a good question. That is our stage 3, which we will be entering into next month. And what we are hoping is, we already have resources throughout Orange County that we would love to make providers and practices aware of if they're not aware of them. And hopefully, it might look like a one-on-one, basis, or it'll look like, depending on the network that they're in. For example, practices that are using Cerner, their data is imported into Help Me Grow, and Help Me Grow actually makes referrals internally, which is really great. So that's actually part of the process, and even a second grant that we're going to be heading into soon with ACEs Aware. But the goal is to take those who are in need of, care and resources and counseling, and connect them to the appropriate resource that will fit their needs, and hopefully have a system that will help us as an organization, but also as providers, to follow up and follow through, because that might look like, a long-term process. But Jamie, you're welcome to add anything if you'd like.
No, I think that covered it well. I think this is a learning curve for pediatricians in particular, and primarily because this is not typically the way that they are trained as physicians to provide care, and it is it's identifying a different approach to the child care that are the medical care that they are providing. So one of the great opportunities we have with ACEs Aware is making those connections so that we can really support medical providers who are screening for ACEs to really connect their patients to the external resources and referral pathways that are available, but maybe are unknown by our medical community.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. One other question before we move on to our next panelist. Is child abuse reporting a part of the ACEs training, or does ACEs include making a report? Where's the nexus between the training for ACEs, and then a child abuse report?
That's a great question. So in the work that we're doing currently with screening, the screenings are just scores only. So when a parent fills out the screening, we don't know, the provider won't know what score. They'll just know the total score, the 0 to 10, but they won't know what the numbers are that identify the type of trauma. And this is done because of confidentiality, but it is also up to the providers in their regular form of care to have discussions, more qualitative discussions with parents and families, so that if there is violence, abuse, neglect that is occurring, that would come out in the counseling that is done with the families. But if we were collecting, and most of the providers, if they're collecting that data, then it is less likely that families might be willing to divulge the information that is needed because of privacy. Do you want to add anything,
Great.
Bianca?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jamie, Bianca, thanks so much for your presentation and those answers. I know we've got a couple more questions that are kind of floating into the Q&A and into the chat box. So if you guys want to take a look at those, anything that are specific to ACEs, and maybe you can bounce out an answer to somebody that's appropriate.
Sure.
Our next panelist, Kelsey Weeman, Deputy District Attorney, representing Orange County's Office of the District Attorney. And her area for discussion this morning with us is going to be on human trafficking. Kelsey is a Deputy District Attorney in the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit for Orange County's District Attorney's Office. In that unit, Kelsey specializes in prosecution of cases involving pimping, pandering, human trafficking of both adult and minor victims, as well as prosecution of felony sex offenses committed against victims of human trafficking. Kelsey's presented on this topic of human trafficking to various audiences and is trained on the topic of investigation and prosecution of human trafficking cases to law enforcement and other agencies. She holds a JD from the University of San Diego School of Law and a BA in both psychology and political science from the University of California, Los Angeles. So, Kelsey, take it away.
Okay, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about our unit, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit within the Orange County District Attorney's Office. We are very lucky to have 5 district attorneys who are all focused on the prosecution that Eldon just talked about myself doing. We also have 3 full-time investigators who assist us with finding victims and maintaining relationships with our victims and ultimately gathering all of the evidence for our case. We also cover all commercial trafficking and some of the felony sex offenses when the victim is potentially also a victim of pimping or human trafficking. We handle all of the cases involving both adult and child victims. And I'm going to talk generally about human trafficking and get into some of the charges, but it's very important to take note, based on our conversations with social services, waymakers, other members of the task force, even the adult victims that we work with, oftentimes they were brought into the life of trafficking and became victims as children, almost all of them. We are very lucky to be part of the Human Trafficking Task Force here in Orange County. It is a very unique organization, and it's unique in the fact that we collaborate together with various agencies. We, like I mentioned, work very closely with Waymakers, our victim advocates, social services, and also all kinds of different agencies. The Human Trafficking Task Force is housed at the Anaheim Police Department. They have detectives from different agencies placed there, and they're the core team that goes out and does the investigations related to trafficking. So one of the things I hear a lot is, you're in a human trafficking unit, is there human trafficking in Orange County? And prior to joining the unit, I hadn't really understood exactly what was happening right here. And that's oftentimes because smuggling is kind of what people think. People have seen different movies in pop culture. A lot of people think of like Taken being what human trafficking is all about, but really human trafficking is here. It's hidden in plain sight. And I'll go through the law of what exactly human trafficking in California is, and it'll be a little easier to understand how that can be happening right here in front of everyone. So human trafficking is any time there is a deprivation of somebody's personal liberty in order for the person controlling the victim to commit pimping or pandering. It's a little bit different when there is a minor victim. And why? Because children obviously are more vulnerable. Anytime somebody encourages, persuades, procures a minor victim to engage in any commercial sex act, that is human trafficking of a minor. I mentioned deprivation of personal liberty. This is what that is. Anytime a person or a trafficker or pimp uses fraud, deceit, coercion, violence, duress, menace, or threats to somebody to control where she can sleep, where that victim can go, what they can buy, what they can eat, controlling all of that person's money, and ultimately cutting them off from family, friends, and other people who can help them, that is a deprivation of that person's liberty. When I mentioned it's a little different for adults and minor victims, when any of those are used to restrain the liberty of a minor victim, that becomes an enhancement that we can add to our case that makes the punishment, it changes from, there's a low term, mid-term, and high term, 5 years, 8 years, 12 years of punishment in state prison for the trafficker. It changes that to potentially 15 years to life. So obviously that is in the best interest of protecting the minor. I mentioned two terms, pimping and pandering. Everybody thinks of pimping. That's kind of what the more popular, well-known term is. And they're a little bit different. What pimping is ultimately the benefit of the money. Anytime a victim is forced to engage in human trafficking or commercial exploitation, the trafficker or the pimp takes all of the money that he or she earns. It's truly all of the money, especially when somebody is being trafficked with force or deceit or fraud. Pandering is the act of encouraging that victim to engage in prostitution. So setting up the dates, that's what it's called in the trafficking world. Setting up the arrangement ultimately for a John or sex purchaser to pay for a sex act with that minor, that's pandering. These are some of the statistics from the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force victim report that just came out last week. So this is the 2021 report. It encompasses statistics from 2019 through 2020. So a little different we saw because of the pandemic. Obviously, at one point in the pandemic, law enforcement's ability to investigate, to do proactive investigations was hindered based on social distancing and ultimately safety. Kind of got back to normal, the investigations, and everything picked up later in the pandemic, but we saw slightly lower numbers, of course, of cases coming in and investigations. But the big takeaway that we saw in the county was human trafficking continued. They were not in isolation. The pandemic really did not stop that type of activity. What we saw were less cases, but once we got a case and looked back at the cell phone evidence, interviews with the victims, they were being forced to work throughout the entire pandemic. Human trafficking, why? Why would anybody choose to make another person do this? It is profitable. A lot of times I am shocked by how much money the pimps and the traffickers are truly making. It is one of the oldest, one of the most profitable criminal enterprises, truly. And again, going back to myths versus realities, what have we learned about conceptions of human trafficking versus what we truly see? A lot of people, and I've heard jurors ask me about this, community members, all types of people have said, what is the harm really in prostitution? Like, isn't it two consenting adults? Obviously it's not when it's a child, but even when it's an adult, we oftentimes see somebody, the victim, being so manipulated and controlled by the trafficker and pimp. In reality, people don't typically grow up aspiring to be a prostitute. A lot of times people think drugs are the motivating factor, but what we've seen is pimps and traffickers, they want to protect what brings them the money. So oftentimes it's in their best interest to not have their victim completely hooked on drugs. They want her to work. They put the victims out on the street for the sole purpose of collecting all of the money they earn. So it's in their best interest to have somebody who is physically able to engage in those prostitution dates so that they can profit from it. One of the most common factors that we've seen across the board in all of the victims that we've encountered and worked with is that history of abuse, neglect, early sexualization, people who don't really have a support system. Pimps and traffickers are smarter than you might think they are. They truly are master manipulators and have perfected the way of targeting somebody who is vulnerable. It is horrifying. They will specifically target people who they find themselves or who they find that they are able to cut off from society. Oftentimes, speaking to victims, they've had their personal cell phones taken away or just completely controlled by the pimp or trafficker. They are not able to call home if they have a stable home to even call. They are not allowed to see their friends. Anytime somebody wants to spend time with them, the pimp or trafficker drives them away. And those are all types of isolation tactics that are used. The methodology of a trafficker, they really do use different types of tactics to ultimately draw in that victim. There are certain types of pimps who act like a boyfriend, try to make the young victim fall in love with them, and then emotionally manipulate them into doing everything that they tell them. Other ones are more violence prone, and they will truly just use violence, scare tactics to isolate the victim that way. I'm going to play a short video, and it's pretty enlightening. This is an older video of a pimp who was speaking pretty openly to detectives. They asked him, like, what could prevent a young woman or a young victim from kind of entering that world with you? And just listen to what he says first.
Oh, I don't think we're hearing sound.
Oh, okay. I might not be able to share my sound. Oh, here we go. I'll try one more time.
Most common thing I've run across,
It's good.
and I'm gonna tell you something, I'm not trying to be funny. If you got a daughter, stay in her life. Because a lot of these girls don't have fathers. They look for guys like us for guidance, to be told what to do. Somebody looking for love in the wrong place. You know, they want to be wanted by a man because obviously their father wasn't there or never gave it to them. So they're looking for that. They want to be told what to do by another superior force. Not trying to be funny, but that's what they're looking for. You know, they're looking for guidance. You know, and that's where we come in and say, that's why you paying me for my guidance. I'm guiding you to this right path, and you need to pay me for it.
And you can see kind of just by what he shared with the detectives that ultimately playing into those vulnerabilities is what they do best. And that is how they profit and how they use the victims for their own financial gain. We've seen victims who tell us that when they were younger, they were recruited from shelters, girls who find a friend who is engaging in prostitution with her own pimp or trafficker, who again is kind of blinded to what is actually happening and will say, hey, you should come meet my boyfriend. He's helping me make a lot of money. Or other victims have seen all of a sudden their friend has very expensive, nice clothes, flashy items, got her nails done, and will say, hey, how'd you get that? So oftentimes that is how people are recruited. Pimps and traffickers will use some of the girls to recruit others. And especially in the very beginning, they don't understand how they're being manipulated and will bring friends to him. Isolation, I mentioned, is used all the time. Why Orange County? We have a lot of pimping and pandering and trafficking occurring here. And Orange County is known to have, at least in parts of it, money. And there's not going to be an end to trafficking and pimping until the supply and demand, the demand has to be targeted too. The Johns or the sex purchasers are willing to spend the money. So human trafficking continues. These are some exhibits from one of the trials we put on. Ultimately, what it shows is how we've collected evidence from different hotel chains. So hotels have been very helpful. We've been doing trainings in the hotel industry, and ultimately that surveillance footage that was provided and the room folios that were provided. And it shows that pimps and traffickers will often move their victims from place to place. They don't often stay in one place for very long. So we will have victims coming here to Orange County from out of state, from different counties, or just on a rotation basis, working what is called different tracks or blades. Those are prostitution heavy areas in different counties throughout California or other states. One of the control tactics used is withholding a victim's property, taking it all away so she doesn't have access to it unless she is able to provide a certain amount of money. Deprivation of liberty includes taking passports, taking driver's licenses away. So ultimately, even if she were able to have a moment of time where she could physically leave, she has nowhere to go. If she is cut off and isolated from friends and family members and has no driver's license, no form of identification, no bank cards, no credit cards, there's not a lot she can do at that point. Another control tactic is condom allocation. If a victim is put out on a blade or a track to work, she'll have to check in every 2 condoms, every 3 condoms. So that way the pimp knows exactly how much money he should be getting from her based on the number of dates she's had.
Right here on Harbor.
That's a video from one of our trials, but Harbor and Hazard right in Santa Ana, doesn't look like much in broad daylight, but that is one of the main prostitution blades or tracks in Orange County. And it's unfortunate, you can see in that map a lot of residences. It is a residential neighborhood just off of those cross streets, and that is where a lot of the prostitution activity occurs. I went on a ride along with Santa Ana, and I was shocked at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. There was traffic. Actual traffic in the residential neighborhoods, which they were only there for one reason. It was very sad. But you've heard me use the term the life. That is kind of what the subculture of pimping and pandering is referred to within the life. And these are just some of the rules. I talked a lot about the control tactics, quotas. You can't come to the hotel. You can't come in to sleep until you bring me X number of money. Victims are required to check in oftentimes with their pimps. So if they're going on dates with a John or sex purchaser, they'll have to text, here, gone, what exactly the sex act was. So ultimately how long they were there and how much money they are required to give the pimp. They have to do, the pimp will tell them whatever the purchaser requires. So if the pimp is the one setting up dates online, he'll agree to whatever sex acts the victim has to engage in, and she is forced to do so. Punishment. I talked a lot about physical abuse, isolation, degradation, torture, branding. We've seen people forced to take like ice baths, dunked in ice water as punishment. We've seen people kept in mattress boxes. It's terrible, some of the abuse that the victims have to go through. And so when people ask, why didn't they run away? Or they didn't have 10 minutes to themselves to run, because human trafficking, that deprivation of liberty, they don't necessarily have to be locked in a room. But when all of this occurs to somebody every day, and when they're isolated from resources, they have no place to go, and they're stuck in this cycle of violence. This is how popular culture portrays some pimps. This is all just internet stuff, but in reality, these are some of the real faces of pimps. All types of people, men, women, different backgrounds. It can truly be anyone, because anyone can be motivated by money. And I've mentioned the term Johns. It is very important, and we are working on some legislative proposals, different ideas for how to better target the demand, because the punishment ultimately for pimps and traffickers is pretty high, but the punishment right now for a sex purchaser, it's a misdemeanor. So there has to be a way to target the demand in order to stop victims from being trafficked and pimped. So I kind of went through that pretty fast, but I know we're short on time. So if anybody has any questions, I'll jump into that right now. I see a couple. Oh, I see, what percent of CSEC victims are female? And the majority of cases we get are female. I don't know the exact percentage, but I do currently also have a case with a male victim, and they're looking at other male victims too. So the majority that we are seeing, or at least that are getting filed or investigated to the point where there is enough evidence to be brought to our office, it's predominantly female, but there are a few that have not been. The consequences for the John or the sex purchaser or client, I've been asked, and what that is covered in currently is 647B of the Penal Code. It's a misdemeanor, so it's a misdemeanor. The maximum there is less than 1 year, so 364 days of jail, and that's the maximum. They don't typically get that. We've seen courts give offers of typically just 10 days of Caltrans or hard labor, 3 years of informal probation. There is AIDS testing. That's about it, search and seizure. So it's pretty low. The exception is if a sex purchaser purchases a minor and knows that that person is a minor, that's when felony sex offenses can kick in currently. That's the state of the law. So we do handle some of those cases too. Briefly, I'll touch on sexting, sextortion, the penal code section for minors who participate in these practices. Ultimately, if somebody is trafficking a minor for the purpose of selling child pornography or different types of explicit photographs, videos of those minors, that can fall under human trafficking. That is one of, depriving somebody's liberty to engage in pimping, pandering, or exchanging child pornography. So that can fall under that category too. Ooh, I got a lot of questions.
Kelsey, I think we have time for one more question, and it's actually in the Q&A. What can the community do to help combat human trafficking of minors, aside from keeping a child's, being involved in the child's life?
That is a great question. And I think the first step is literally what you're doing right now. Awareness is absolutely key. It's one of the reasons that the task force as a group is always teaching the community. Ultimately, just knowing what to look for, like I said, a lot of it is hidden in plain view. So there are people who might see a minor who potentially could be a victim, looking at the ground, kind of looking afraid, being controlled by somebody else. All of the common sense red flags that truly might lead to an investigation that could help that particular minor, but also attending forums like this and being aware and spreading the word to friends, family members, the community. Ultimately, the community ends up being on the jury pool, ends up being the people who tell others who can assist a minor. So I think this is step one, just really spreading the word of what human trafficking is.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. I noticed that there are a couple of more questions that are popping in, and if you wouldn't mind taking a look at them, and during our next panelist presentation, maybe you could shoot out a couple of quick answers to folks. We'd appreciate that. And again, thank you, Kelsey, for your presentation. Next up, we have our third panelist, a longtime supporter and member of our Child Abuse Prevention Council, Detective Nasario Solis. Nasario is going to be presenting on mandated reporting. Nasario is a 41-year veteran of law enforcement. And I have to say, Nasario, you must have started when you were 12, okay? Because you look way younger than that.
Well, thank you.
He currently is a Master Reserve Officer with the City of Tustin. He's been and continues to be an advocate of the protection of children, elders, and the most vulnerable in Orange County communities. He has served on Orange County's child and elder death review teams, collaborates with the County of Orange Social Services Agency and many nonprofits, teaches for Coastline Regional Occupation Program, and presents at conferences and obviously in programs like this. He's been asked to consult on child abuse, elder abuse related issues throughout the nation, and is a dedicated member of our Orange County Child Abuse Prevention Council. He is also currently part of Orange County's SCAM team, Elder Forensic Center of Orange County, and other organizations that are dedicated to the protection of children and elders. Nasario, thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Alden. I know my time is going to be very, very short, so I'm going to go as quickly as I can. Actually, this can be summed up in just a short phrase. When you suspect abuse, report it. And earlier, there was a question about what can be done to prevent human trafficking. Well, human trafficking is child abuse. So the start is identification and reporting. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Next slide, please. And we're just going to cover just real quickly, what is child abuse? How do you report? When police and social services step in, and what to look for as far as what abuse is with social services as part of a team. Next slide, please. The law says basically abuse is any act of omission or commission that endangers or impairs a child's physical or emotional health and development. There's a lot of gray area in here. And that is one of the problems with when there are issues of people not reporting, agencies not reporting, is because of that gray area. A lot of times you do self-investigation. You take the information, but then you look further to corroborate that, hey, there is abuse here. That's not what the law says. And we're going to go through what the law actually says. Next slide, please. Somebody asked about statistics. I pulled down some statistics. There's a website down there for social services. Social services in Orange County is fantastic about providing up-to-date, almost minute-to-minute statistics on child abuse. And it's every month they're provided to put in there. So if you want to go in and look at what the statistics are on child abuse reporting, go to the website and you'll be able to obtain monthly statistics. Next, please. I get the statistics for 2020. And as you can see, Eldon did a very fantastic job about telling us how much abuse there is. And there is a lot of abuse. In Orange County, you got over 32,000 reported cases of abuse to the Child Abuse Registry. So even if only a third gets reported, imagine how much abuse there actually is that is not reported. Next slide, please. When we're talking about abuse, it's broken down: sexual, physical, severe neglect, and general neglect. Dr. McDonald was talking about ACEs, and ACEs really is important because of the mental issue of the child, the mental condition of the child. It all starts with the child's mental health. And that's why it's so important for us to when we see that there is or suspect there's abuse, to make that report so we can start at the beginning and hopefully avoid some of these sexual abuse cases, physical abuse cases, human trafficking cases. Next. Next, please. Thank you. I did a little breakdown because there was a big question. Well, what did COVID did? What did COVID do to child abuse reporting? Well, you can see in the breakdown, it's pretty apparent that during COVID, during our lockdown phase, there were not a lot of reports coming in. They were kind of almost in third. When we opened up again, more reports started to come in. When we shut down, less reports. I believe, based on my experience, that once school starts full time, we're going to get a ton of reports. Once ACEs starts being implemented throughout Orange County is going to get a ton of reports, because the way ACEs is, and if I'm correct, Dr. McDonald, the way ACEs is set up, there are going to be physicians that are going to be getting information that they will have to make a child abuse report. So we're going to see an increase in reporting. Next, please. All right, these are some of the, somebody mentioned, what are some of the abuses we see in Orange County? We see sexual abuse, physical abuse, severe neglect, general neglect, emotional abuse, exploitation, human trafficking, caretaker absence, caretaker incapacity. These are just some of the abuses we see. Next, please. Purpose of the reporting law: well, to provide protection for the defenseless child, to initiate helping and rehabilitation services for the parent or guardians of the child. The reporters do have some immunity when they make the report. Next, please. And this is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid headlines, TV news shows where our names show up because we failed to do something. Next, please. Yes, there are children dying in Orange County and other counties because someone failed them. Someone that could have initially caught that suspected abuse, made that report, gotten some early intervention, but they didn't do that. They chose to either ignore or to just either think that they didn't have enough evidence. But we're going to discuss that in a little bit. Next, please. Okay, if you observe abuse and you believe it to be abuse, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to report it. Okay, now that you're ready to report, what are we going to do? Next. Okay, report whenever you know or suspect, okay, you reasonably suspect that a child is in danger or being abused or neglected. If you don't know, if you're not sure, well, this is kind of, I think it's abuse, but I'm not really sure, make the call. There's going to be a trained person on the other side of that child abuse registry phone with social services that is going to help you evaluate that case. They may tell you, thank you very much for the call. Yes, it's a little concerning, but we don't have enough to substantiate and generate a social worker to go out and conduct an investigation. At least it's documented. That phone call is recorded and it's there in case we need, law enforcement needs to use it later on in another case if it happens again. Next slide, please. What is reasonable suspicion? Okay, reasonable suspicion is just something that comes up that causes you to believe, or a normal person based on their training and experience, to believe that there might be some abuse going on here, that there's something going on here that is concerning to you. Okay, make the call. Knowledge criteria, this includes actual observation of child abuse, obtaining knowledge of abuse from child or others. So even you get information from other people, third parties saying, oh, I believe this is going on. And if you're a mandated reporter during the course of your employment, again, you need to make the call. And we're going to discuss during the course of the employment versus not being during the course of your employment. Next, please. Okay, the law in California versus mandated reporting. Next, please. Okay, the law is pretty simple. A mandated reporter, which is a majority of us, and we can discuss who is and who's not, shall make a report to the police department, the sheriff's department, not including school resource police agencies or college police agencies. Okay, they're not included. If you make the report to them, it's not sufficient. It's got to be to a local police department, sheriff, or county probation department if the county designates them as taking child abuse reports, and Orange County does. Okay, when the reporter professional capacity, scope of employment knows that or reasonably suspects a child to be abused and neglected. Okay, reasonably suspects. Doesn't mean you have to prove it. Doesn't mean the evidence has to be there. Doesn't have to meet. It has to meet certain elements. You just reasonably suspect it. The initial report is by telephone. Then you follow it up by either a fax or a written form mailed or electronically now using a computer. So the county has made it super easy for you to make these reports. Next, please. What's a mandated reporter? Okay, those that are required by law, that have a legal duty to report, that can't be held liable. You fail to report, you do have some immunity against if anybody sues you. Okay. Oh, a discretion reporter is if you're not during the course of your employment, or anybody else out there that is not a mandated reporter or is a mandated reporter, but they're not in a working condition, a situation. So say, for instance, I'll use, I know for a fact that doctors are mandated reporters. So I use Dr. McDonald. Dr. McDonald is at a grocery store. She observed what she believes to be a mother slapping a 2-year-old across the face. Now, at that point, she is not during the course of her employment. So she's a discretionary reporter, which means she can report or doesn't have to report. Morally, I think there's an obligation to report, but legally, there's no obligation there. If she does report, she does have certain immunities as well. Now, say, for instance, Dr. McDonald approaches this woman and tells her, hey, that you shouldn't do that. I am a medical doctor. I'm a pediatrician, and that could cause harm to that child's brain, head, and you should not be doing that. What has she done at this point? Well, she's placed herself during the course of her employment. So now she has just become a mandated reporter. So those are things that are important for you to have knowledge of when your neighbor comes to you next door and says they know you're a social worker, they know you're a police officer. I'm going to mention attorneys in a little bit, but they come to you and say, we suspect that there's abuse going on 2 apartments down. At that point, you're not employed, you're not working. So you become a discretionary reporter. Next, please. All right, so mandated reporters, who are they? Well, doctors, practitioners, MDs, psychologists, teachers' aides, child care custodians. You can see the list. Interestingly, clergy are mandated reporters, but only during certain situations. Okay, if they're taking a confessional from someone, they're not mandated reporters at that point. Firefighters. Interestingly enough, attorneys are not mandated reporters. Okay, because a client-attorney privilege is similar to the penitent clergy privilege, and the state of California has said that because those privileges are so important that we are not going to make them mandated reporters. Next, please. Next slide. Oh, thank you. When you learn about child abuse outside of the realm of personal capacity, such as in personal life or family, again, you're going to become a mandated reporter. Next slide. We already discussed this earlier. If you fail to report as a mandated reporter, it's a crime. It's a misdemeanor. We talked about misdemeanors earlier, so I'm not going to rehash it. But a mandated reporter who intentionally conceals a reporter's failure to report incident or abuse or severe neglect, it's a continuing offense, which means that in a misdemeanor, you get a statute of limitations of a year. But say a social worker conceals a case of abuse, doesn't report, or a police officer or a mandated reporter, and 2-3 years down the road, it gets discovered. Well, now that person who failed to report, the statute is told because they intentionally failed to report it, now they can be charged with a misdemeanor. Next. Reporting procedures. Next. Child abuse registry hotline. Okay, everybody should have all mandated reports should have this on speed dial in case you come across a suspected child abuse. In Orange County, the child abuse hotline also houses the Adult Protective Services hotline. So it's the same people that are be taking or the same area where you're going to be making the calls. Now, these are the people that are trained to evaluate the cases you're going to be calling in. If you call in, they don't take a report. They take the report, they tell you it's documentation only. No one's going to be sent out. Document the name of the person that gave you that information and the time and date that you did it. If you're a doctor, if you're a nurse, put it in the chart. Next. Making a report, we talked about that. You got to make it immediately as soon as possible. Your telephone at that point, then your written report can go 36 hours later. And it has to be both. You got to make the call and you got to submit a written report, faxed or electronically submitted. Next. Who do you report to? Protective Services, law enforcement. Now here's something that I've seen in Orange County that is troubling to me. Sometimes it'll be reported to police only, not social services. A police officer will go out to the scene, determine that, well, wait a minute, this appears to be appropriate corporal punishment. And that's it. Parents are advised, they move on. They don't cross-report social services because they determine that this is just parental discipline. Now, that to me should always be reported to social services. You make the evaluation, and legally officers can do that. Social workers can do that. But I think it's really important to always cross-report to each other's agency. That social worker may not be aware, may not have the ability to query, to search that family and that address to find out there have been 26 other calls there to police, and the officers have always responded and nothing's been done, and vice versa. So if you're going to be calling, if you're a hospital, if you're a doctor, you're in an emergency room, you're going to be calling on a major incident, I suggest you call police and social services so we can team together and work on the suspected abuse. Next, please. The forms, next please. We're going to go over the forms real quickly just to show you what they look like. That's a triplicate form, the written form that's mailed in. Next, please. Okay, that's the fax number, and this will be available for you later on if you want. If you want to send in the fax during working hours, that's a fax number you would send it to. Next, please. And that's a fax. So you either do the written form, the fax, or the email. Next, the email form. That's just the back of it. Actually explains to you exactly how you need to fill out the form. The email is my favorite because email, you call social services, they provide you your own account. And now every time you call as a mandated reporter, everything's filled out for you. All you have to do is just put in the name of the people and the new circumstances. And this to me is fantastic. This is the best way to file your written report. Next, please. Next, please. We're going to talk about social services real briefly because I know that we're short on time, but they're going to have different type of responses. It's going to immediate response where they're going to go out right away within 2 hours. In Orange County, I've had them respond within minutes, literally 10, 15 minutes, and they're there at the hospital, wherever I need them. They're going to have an overnight response. They're going to have social workers determine the response at a certain date, and then there's going to be a 10-day response, which means the worker has 10 days to respond from the time that they receive the case to work. Next, please. The criminal process that I'm more familiar with. Next, please. Okay, we take the report. The police officer investigates, prepares a report, submits a report to the DA's office. The DA will look into the report, see if there's further investigation. They may refuse it outright for lack of sufficient evidence or some other reason, or they will file the complaint. If they file the complaint, then there's going to be a process of it going to court and the person answering in a criminal court. Next, please. So we discussed that. We sometimes when we take the report, generally in law enforcement, we take the first disclosure from the child, and then we don't continue to ask the child any further questions. We take advantage of CAST, Child Abuse Services Team in Orange County, which in my opinion is fantastic. And they've been around since the late 80s. This is a benefit to law enforcement, the DA's office, and the family and the child. Next, please. Our district attorney's office, again, they're going to refuse it, file it. They do file, they have to decide whether it's going to be a misdemeanor or felony. In Orange County, we have a vertical unit for physical child abuse cases that are of felony nature. And I saw that Supervisor Deputy DA Jana Hoffman is in the participants. She's the lead of that unit. She is fantastic about looking into the child abuse cases that we submit. She has a tremendous amount of knowledge. I've worked with her on many, many cases. Couldn't hope for a better person to lead that unit. But again, that unit will make the determination whether the case is going to be filed or not filed. Next, please. Different perspectives. So with social services, we have different perspectives. Okay, protecting the children, sibling, good forensic, non-traumatic interview, co-investigate. I cannot stress enough how law enforcement and social services need to work together as a team. When I first started working law enforcement, that wasn't the case. There was always, oh, you're a social worker, you're a baby saver, I'm here to arrest, protect, in that way. I've seen that change. And that's what needs to be occurring. We have to work together as a team because we both have different perspectives, but the same goal. Next, and that is to protect that child. All right, so the training I provided for you is basically Orange County-based training. There is free online training that's put together by the California Social Services Department that is job specific. So teachers, law enforcement, officers can go on there. It's a 2-hour program where you have to get on your computer. You can actually get a certificate from the state of California that you've passed the mandated reporter training, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything, but I've taken this. I do have some issues with the training. The main issue is that I believe that you suspect, you report. The training allows you to evaluate a case a little bit further. But my belief is that you need to, as soon as you suspect, you have to report it. Have we filed in Orange County against mandated reporters? Yes, there have been mandated reports that have been filed criminally against for misdemeanor charges. But that's not necessarily the more serious issue. The more serious issue is if you fail to report, how are you going to feel the next morning when you find out that child has been either seriously injured or killed? The moral issue, I think, is the most important issue. And the 41 years I've been doing this, that's one of the reasons I have been doing this for so many years. And one of the reasons I continue to do this, and I will continue until I'm not invited anymore, but is because I've been in that situation where I've lost kids that I could have saved, but I didn't act at the time. And then the next day I find out those kids were murdered. So, and unfortunately that was more than one time, really early on in my career. So those, unless you get those kind of, life-changing experiences, you have to report and not be cautious about your reporting. And I think that is it. Next, I don't know. Yep, that's it. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk very quickly. This is generally an 8-hour presentation, so.
Nasario, we appreciate that you're both a part of the council and that you've taken the time to be with us this morning to share this very important information. I did notice that there are a few questions in the Q&A and a couple things in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind responding to those while our next next presenter steps up to the plate. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Catherine Hamill. Catherine is part of Junior League Orange County, Inc., a wonderful organization that has been a longtime partner and supporter of the Raise Foundation and child abuse prevention here in Orange County. This morning, she's going to be discussing financial literacy as a prevention tool. Catherine has more than 15 years experience in finance and business management roles. She's currently a senior financial analyst for global finance operations within the rates and overhead team in El Segundo for a very, very important airline company, Boeing. She supports the cost management of space development activity. She's, when I look at the things that she does, it just boggles my mind that here she is as part of our team. She supports cost management of spacecraft development activity, both commercial and governmental, and leads a team who functionally aid the effort. Previously, Catherine worked within engineering, test and technology, enterprise services, and corporate. In those divisions, she managed overhead budgets, costs, risk, revenue stream, financial forecasting through in-depth data analytics for large enterprise initiatives, commercial aircraft, and defense programs. Catherine's just really experienced in this stuff, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation, Catherine, on financial literacy and how we can use that as a tool in prevention.
Absolutely. I'd love to share my screen because I have a presentation. All right. We're going to talk about financial literacy today. So if you go ahead and flip to the next slide. So today what we're going to talk about, because this is a huge topic and there are so many areas to cover, but financial literacy, what does it mean? We're going to look at goal setting and how that applies to financial literacy, spending, the behaviors behind it, how we do it, and tracking. All right, next slide. So financial literacy, what does it mean? But the basic construct, it is how we manage our money. And why is money important? It's because that is what we use as a medium of exchange to survive. So a lot of financial literacy is what your relationship is with money. And the interesting thing is this is something that impacts all socioeconomic levels. It affects all cultures. It is not something that is just targeted to low economic areas. And actually, according to the Financial Industry Regulation Authority, or it's called FINRA, only 34% of Americans have a greater understanding of financial literacy. So that means there are 66% of the population who do not know how to use their money. So what you do is with this financial literacy, when you become confident with it, you are able to be financially empowered to make decisions and move forward and feel more at ease and free with life. So a lot of this is the understanding and being able to effectively use these skills. And some of those include personal finance, budgeting components, tracking your expenses, ways you purchase your goods, like what do you use a credit card? Do you use a debit card? What is it that you use? What type of banking do you have that allows you to purchase things? Investments, how you are investing your dollars today for the future. Debts, when we take on debt for mortgage debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, car loan debt, how we manage that and how that plays into the bigger picture. Budgets, like I mentioned earlier, that's just making a plan for yourself. Compound interest, how your dollars will grow on top of themselves. And then the time value of money, and that's really associated with how inflation affects your dollar. The dollar that you have today, will it be worth $1 in the future, or will it be less than that? And how do you keep it at the same level? Next chart. All right, so goal setting. This is so important because this is how you help set yourself up for success. You have your hopes and your dreams, and you have to turn those into goals. So it's important you make that list, hopes and dreams, and then get smart with them. Be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals to make that happen. Here are some examples. I hope to get out of credit card debt someday. And the really strong goal associated with that is I will pay down $1,000 of my debt over the next 18 months. Or another one could be, I'd like to buy a new television. The strong goal for that is I will save $400 in the next 6 months and purchase a new television. So you can see these are starting to become specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, so that way you can measure your performance against it. Are you working towards your goal? And then the last one example is, it is my dream to go to Hawaii on vacation with my partner for 5 days. So I take a look at that, I look at what the costs are, and I decide, okay, I will save $50 a week for the next 12 months to cover airfare, lodging, and food for my partner and I to go on a dream vacation to Hawaii for 5 days. Okay, next slide. Now we take a look at spending. So we've set our goals, laid it out. Now, how is it that we're going to spend our dollars? And there are some things we really need to break it down into when it comes to spending. We need to look at our needs, our wants, and our obligations. And when we think about our needs, we think about what are those things that we must have to live. So at the basic construct, it's water, food, and shelter, right? So we need to make sure that our dollars can cover those things. And then wants, things we can survive without. Do we need the latest and greatest piece of technology? Do we need a new mode of transportation? Or do we even need a new piece of transportation, a car, a motorcycle, whatever it is? Do I need something new? Or can I use something that I already have? Is there something that I can get recycled or refurbished, if I need to replace something? But it's needs versus wants. Needs are, I need this to survive and to live, and wants are, it might be nice. It could be an entertainment piece or something that could bring you joy. And maybe you might categorize some of these things as a must for you, a need, because it does bring you joy and that's part of what brings you happiness. But at the basics of it, needs are the things you have to live. And then lastly, obligations. So these are things you have to pay because you owe someone money. Some of these examples include rent, mortgages, credit card debt, car loans, or things that you've been ordered to pay to someone like child support. So you can see some of these things kind of cross over between the needs and the wants. The obligations kind of go into both of those, but at the end of the day, you're obligated to pay these dollars back. Okay, next slide. So as we're spending our money, we've identified our wants, our needs, and our wants and our obligations. We look at how we purchase goods. And Gary, could you make the slide just a little bit smaller? There we go. So we're going to purchase goods, and we have several means to do that. We've got cash, we've got credit cards, we've got debit cards, and electronic transfers. So a lot of us would use cash. How do we get cash? We get cash at banks. We get cash from financial institutions. Credit cards, debit cards, similar but different. Credit cards, that is a promise to pay some access to money in the future with an interest rate on it, so you'll pay more for what you actually paid for. And debit cards are actually linked to specifically your dollars in your bank account. So that transaction is happening instantaneously of moving your money to someone else. And then electronic transfers, similar in a way to debit cards, but not using a debit card backed by a credit provider. Some of these could be things like PayPal or Venmo, right? So electronic transfers that you see there. Now, all these elements of how we like what the dollars are tied to our accounts. And we have so many different types of accounts. We have savings accounts. That's where you put your money to be utilized in the next 6 months to a year, helping keep yourself, and for the long term as well, keeping yourself built up and protected for those rainy days, and to help you sustain your living. Checking accounts, very similar. That is usually where you're connected to a debit card. Not many people write checks anymore, but they are still a piece that is utilized. And a check is a piece of tender that you write out, hand it over. There is usually no interest bearing on these checking accounts. There are some credit unions that will do that, but it is usually just a position to hold your dollars to then move forward. Then there's things that are a brokerage account. And in those, you've got money market account and then a way to help handle the stocks and investments that you purchase. So a lot of what you would see for a brokerage account, some of you may be familiar with, like Robinhood and what happened with GameStop. So that would be an area that would be considered part of a brokerage. Charles Schwab, Fidelity, these are companies that have brokerage accounts. Many banks that we already interact with have specific brokerage accounts to do that investing for you, to help you with your investing. But just a key to help you in there with a Robinhood was a big piece in the news not that long ago with everything that happened with GameStop. Then you also have your retirement accounts. And this is building your wealth or your dollars and your savings for the long term, the long future. So you've got 401ks, 403bs, Roth 401ks. These are typically provided by your employer. You have an IRA and a Roth IRA. IRA stands for individual retirement account. And this is where you provide to a brokerage dollars to help invest for you. And there are dollar limitations on all these retirement accounts each year. There's a simple IRA and a SEP, which is the self-employed pension plan. So if you're self-employed, there are retirement options for you to save. And then overall, there is something many people learned about, especially in government opportunities. They have pensions, or also known as defined benefits. So it's important to remember that not all bank accounts and banks are created the same. A lot of these are backed by the Securities Exchange position. That's what, or Securities Exchange Commission, which is what helps regulate all of the businesses out there and what they report for Wall Street to go into that brokerage account. We have FINRA, which I mentioned earlier, the Financial Industry Regulation Authority. So that's really there as a resource to consumers to help understand and make sure that their dollars are going in the right, being handled correctly by the right people. And then there's the FDIC. That is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And it's important for you to recognize that the FDIC is who helps keep your dollars insured. So as it stands, if a bank has an FDIC insurance stamp on it, that means for every $250,000 per depositor per account. So if you have a joint account and you are two people, you could save up to, or you could have $500,000 backed by the government. So what this means is if the bank goes out of business, there is fraud, failure, or theft in the accounts, the government is backing those institutions to make sure your dollars are still safe. So accounts or areas that you wouldn't see that, like if you have money sitting in your Venmo account or your PayPal account, that's not FDIC insured. That is, somebody could come in, and I've heard many stories of this happening to people where they accidentally paid the wrong person on Venmo, or someone came in and got the dollars that were lingering in their account for a bit. Those aren't FDIC insured dollars, and it made it very hard to go back, and they had to deal with police reports and getting it tracked down that way. Something that's very important to recognize too, with when you use credit cards versus debit cards with this, is credit identity theft. So it is believed to be a lot safer transactionally with your credit or with your identity to use a credit card on purchases if you have the money to pay for it. Debit cards, there could be, like at the gas station, somebody could put a scammer on one of the pumps when you go to put your debit card in, and it could swipe all the information off your debit card and take your money. And so a lot of the credit cards are protected better than the debit cards, because that's immediately taking your cash out right then, which is what I mentioned earlier, right? So what you can see on this slide too, I have pictures of brands and logos of a lot of the companies that you will recognize with banking and finance activity on lots of levels. Okay, next slide. All right, and then our last slide that I'm going to talk about is tracking. And this is managing your resources, also known as setting a budget. A lot of people don't want to live by a budget or listen to a budget, but you live a budget every day, whether it's your dollars, whether it's your time, whether it's your food for the week or your menus. So if you think about it, setting a budget with your dollars is very similar to how you plan your meals. You think about it, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You need to make sure you're prepared for 21 meals per person. So what is it that you're going to do to fulfill that? Another way to look at it, so say you get a dozen eggs and you eat 2 eggs a day for the week. Do you have enough eggs to support you for the whole week? No, you don't. You have to be able to stretch it out. So maybe you have 1 egg on Saturday and 1 egg on Sunday and 2 eggs the rest of the days instead. But if you had budgeted and bought 2 dozen eggs, then that could have helped you support that. So the best way to do this is sum up your income. So what are all the dollar values you have coming in on a monthly basis? What is it that you're getting from your employment? What is it that you are getting from your investments? What is it that you're getting in the form of gifts? How are all those things supporting you on a month-to-month basis? Then you make a list of all your monthly expenses. And you have to look at it from the standpoint of your fixed expenses versus your variable. So, and some of these things are going to tie back into what we talked about earlier on needs versus wants, right? So fixed value should be your rent every month or your mortgage, right? You're going to be paying the same amount every single month. You might have, an adjustment through your lease being up and you get a new lease and so it goes up a little bit, or there might be a change in that, but for the most part your rent should be pretty stable. It should be fixed, the same amount every month. Variable, looking at electricity, well, that's definitely a need, right, or for all of us to survive, but your electricity consumption could be completely different in the month of January as it is during July. Right? July, it's hotter. You might be using air conditioning. So your electricity is going to go up. School's out. More people are on internet. Your electricity is going to go up. So it's being able to manage the difference and within your budget of your fixed costs and your variable costs. And something that's super helpful is just putting those due dates on a monthly calendar. Like, when is everything due? Rent is due on the 1st. Electricity is due on the 15th. My credit card is due on the 10th. Listing those things out. So then you total up all those monthly expenses and then you make adjustments each month as you see fit, right? Like, okay, I've got $20 to spend for gas, my gas utilities this month. And I came in at $13 instead. Okay, well now we could adjust it that month to 13 and on our expenses, and then we've got $7 left over, so we can figure out maybe I have a higher expense somewhere else that I can apply that to. And you're going to repeat this each month. So some tools that I've found that are very helpful when you're doing any budgeting, Mint is a great personal finance app where it will track all your expenses. If you link it to your cards, to your bank accounts, to your investments, it'll give you a whole picture of what you look like holistically. Utilizing spreadsheets, things like Google Sheets or Excel, Pages, those are great tools that you can use to tailor your needs and how you want to follow your cash flow and how you spend your money. And then always calendars. Calendars are kind of a guidepost. Like I said earlier, rent is due on the 1st, credit cards due on the 10th, just marking those things down so they are visible and you can keep yourself accountable. So one of the biggest things is what happens when your expenses are greater than your income? And really what that means is you're going to go into debt, right? unless you've got savings, right? So if you've got some savings to cover those expenses that were higher than your income, that's great. You could utilize that because that's what savings is for. Savings is intended to help cover those shortfall months. But if we don't have that savings, then we could go into debt, and that can get us into a big trap with higher interest rates, and we'd end up paying, we go into a debt cycle that could snowball and become very challenging to keep up with and to pay down. And then that's all I have. I have another slide that gives some great resources on various consumer tools and information so people can dive into the details a bit more. There's also a terrific podcast out there called So Money by Farnoosh Torabi, who addresses so many different types of financial challenges across socioeconomic levels and cultures. So I highly recommend that. And that's it.
Catherine, thank you very much. Just got a question that came in. How it just in a kind of a synopsis format, why is this financial literacy so important for prevention of child abuse, neglect, and maltreatment?
It's so important because it helps people understand how we can survive, right? We talked about neglect earlier. If we don't have the understanding of how we can support our dollars to protect our children, to feed our children, to provide shelter for our children, that would constitute neglect, right? And so if we don't have an understanding of how we manage our money to protect ourselves and our children, then it's going to go down that spiral that could be a generational impact.
Great, thank you. So we're nearing the end of our time together, but to wrap up, we'd like to bring all of the panelists back in, kind of in a live setting. We've got a couple of questions that I'd like to throw out to everyone, just for kind of a demonstration of how we work together as kind of a multidisciplinary group. The first question really has to do with communication. How important is shared communication and data tracking among the various professionals and agencies that work to protect children?
Can we just answer or
Yeah, just throw out an answer.
I'll start with the answer. I put my little raised hand, but I don't know if you could see it or not, but it's crucial. It is absolutely crucial. The communication between those individuals that are out there to seek the protection of these children is the most important thing. Remember that the laws in the state of California, and actually in the United States, will allow for communications during certain situations like child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence. HIPAA is not applicable during those cases. So if the legislators and the legal professionals felt that communication is so important that we cannot be, that even privacy is second to that need for communication when you're dealing with these very important issues like child abuse, then that's all we need to say. I mean, that is crucial that we need to communicate with each other. Luckily in Orange County, we do have that communication. We have open access to the district attorney's office. Okay, any of us can call anybody, any district attorney, and talk to them. Kelsey can tell you. I mean, she'd be more than willing to no, she's not going to sit there and provide legal advice to anybody, but you know, if it's a crucial situation, you can provide the resources for that person. So that communication is absolutely the most important thing to me, aside from making the report.
Kelsey, what's your thought on that?
Oh, you're muted.
Muted.
I meant to unmute and I muted, but I was saying I completely agree with Nasario. I think keeping different statistics, and it only helps all of us learn and do a better job in our respective roles to ultimately collaborate and help child victims. we're pretty lucky that the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force, they do a great job and they release the annual victim report. So I think that's available on the website now. So that keeps a lot of the statistics and keeps track kind of successes, things that can be bettered ultimately.
Great, thanks. My last question for you really is kind of a wrap up. And each of you just, pitch in with whatever you think is appropriate here, but from your individual perspectives and as a group, what do you see right now in Orange County with regards to abuse, neglect, maltreatment, preventing these issues for children? What are the trends? What are the priorities? What are the changes that you're seeing? What are the impacts that are going to be most meaningful? And the second part of that really for me is, what can we all do? It's not just about Nasario as a police officer, but what can we all do to be a part of solving this problem?
I can start. So, Nasario, you're muted.
Sorry. I think we're proactive. I think that a lot of the things we do right now is reactive. Human trafficking, reactive. Police, reactive. So we need to be proactive. We need to go out there and get involved in our community. Okay, mentorship programs. To me, that's huge. I grew up in Santa Ana neighborhood, gang infested, was part of a gang. Santa Ana mentorship police officers came out, mentored me, and that's why I became a police officer, one of the reasons. But I think we need to really, I'm sorry, Dr. McDonald, statistics are fantastic, but it's not actually going out there and doing it. It's like the old Nike saying, okay, you see an issue, you see a problem, do it, do something about it. Okay. And just a quick plug in. A couple of years ago, I saw there was a need for county-wide child abuse, physical abuse evaluation investigation by teams. I helped put together an Orange County suspected child abuse and neglect team where, and Jan is part of it, Tiffany, I saw Tiffany Williams from the coroner's offices here. We're all part of this team that evaluates some of these child abuse cases. Unfortunately, it is reactive, but we also try to come up with positive things. The Raise Foundation, fantastic organization. We're trying to do things that are proactive, better child abuse reporting communication. The reports going to the police departments immediately, working with a board of supervisors. Those are things that can be done that are proactive versus reactive.
Jamie, what were you going to say?
Sure. So, and Nasario, I really appreciate the you giving me the medical license, but I'm not a physician. I just want to make sure people know that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that what we're seeing with our medical community is a more of an emphasis on building resilience and building those protective factors that can help to mitigate adverse outcomes in the future. So looking at ways to promote some of the kind of stress busting resources and strategies within families, helping with social determinants of health and looking at ways to help mitigate the effects of things like poverty, hunger, and abuse, of course, and promoting opportunities for things like housing and economic resources, and then also looking at resilience among our providers and ensuring that they are protecting themselves and along with the staff that are supporting all of these families to ensure that they as protectors and as providers are healthy and well as well.
Great, thanks for that, Jamie. Kelsey, I'm interested from, obviously I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of our district attorney, Todd Spitzer, but just from your personal perspective, doing the work that you do, what do you see as the, what are the critical points here? What are the things that are really surfacing that we need to really pay attention to, and what can we do as a community?
I think the one thing across the board that stuck out to me the most is whether it is an adult victim that I'm talking to or somebody who already is young, a child. They are all saying that they were brought into human trafficking, recruited, brought in by another female or by the trafficker at a very young, vulnerable age. So across the board, people are targeting child victims. And I think kind of just piggybacking off that video, the person who was saying, stay in their lives, make sure there's a support system. Obviously, not everybody is in a position to be that child's parent, but I think kind of like what Nazario said, community involvement, just different role models from the community can really change somebody's life. Just having an authority figure, even if that's not within the child's own home, having somebody to look up to and go to and kind of model their own self after, that is key. So community involvement, just like Nazario said, actually doing something, or even just simply being there and accessible, I think that's what we can do best.
Great. And Catherine, I will ask you to speak on behalf of your organization. Junior League is a great contributor to just what Kelsey was talking about, getting involved in the community. What from Junior League's perspective and from your personal perspective, what can we do to help families?
It's the little things. It's being involved in your community. It's being there to be a friend. It's being a human. It's being kind, right? It's showing up and reading to a child. It is being kind to a child and showing them that they're great. They can have hopes and dreams, creating that safe environment for them. So some of the things that the Junior League does, they do these great done in a day activities to do those Band-Aid fix in the community quick. And they also do long-term change to the community by working with our elected officials at the everything's local, right? But you have it on many different levels at the state, the federal level, to create that long-term impact with getting the right legislation and policies in place to protect our children. So it's speaking up. It's speaking up and talking to your legislator. It's voting, right? It's the simple act of just voting for someone who's going to represent you well. Get to know those people that are going to be representing you. So it's a lot of that. It's jumping in when there's a need, right? There are so many times the Raise Foundation has reached out to us and said, hey, Junior League, can you help put together this event for one of our resource centers and family resource centers? And we jump in, create a family fun day and help with some education there for the parents, right? We've done those kinds of things. We've even done things to help animals, and animals have been great to help with children as well, to help them have that peace of mind and calming component. We have children read to the animals at the shelter, so it helps them with their own literacy and help them build up their own confidence. So it's being there for the children.
Great. Well, I think I'm sorry to say we've kind of reached our time limit. I think we could go on and talk about a lot of other things together here. I want to thank all of you for joining us who are participants, and obviously thank you so much to our panelists for your presentation, for being here with us today and sharing information. A great presentation. All of the slide, there have been a couple of questions that have popped into the Q&A and the chat about, are we going to have access to the slides and the information? And the answer is yes. I'm giving you a heads up. I'm about to give you an email address of someone to contact if you have any questions after we're finished. That would be Gary, Gary, at theraisefoundation.org. He is our technical coordinator here today. He has done a great job, and he should be able to give you any kind of follow-up support if you have questions about things. We are planning more of these forums in the future, so visit our website, stay in touch with us. We appreciate you being here. Please also check your email. We'll be sending out a survey. We'd like to gauge what types of training and workshops you'd like to see us provide next. And lastly, visit theraisefoundation.org for more details on Blue Ribbon Month, Orange County's Child Abuse Prevention Council, and ways you can get involved. Thank you for being here. Go Blue.
Thank you.